Yo, what up? This is Kenny. Welcome to Fobology. This video is going to be my part 2 to commander assets. Whereas my first video was more about the basics, the cooldowns of the assets, and how to call them in, this video is going to be more about the strategies behind how I use each asset. Alright, first up is airstrikes. My primary goal for an airstrike is to find a hab in the open and completely delete it. I want it completely gone, to force the enemy to get more supplies and a squad leader to place a new one. Now obviously, if the radio happens to be right next to the hab and they're both in the open, as the example on the screen now, then I'm going to hit them both. But typically that's not the case and I have to choose one or the other. I used to try to find the radio and hit that if it was in the open, but the problem now is that the bleed out system allows 60 seconds for anybody on their team to run over there with a shovel and fix the radio, which I think is easy to recover from. When I'm calling in the airstrike, I use the UAV to put my tactical mark about 30 meters behind the target I want to hit, and then I use my attack marker or move marker to indicate where I want the arrow to end for the airstrike. So you can see right here, I'm pulling the arrow right up to my attack marker so I know it's very precise on the target because I called that attack mark using the UAV zooming right in on it. This tip of using my attack marker from the UAV to indicate the position, the length, and the direction of the airstrike is really important because it's important to be precise since there's not a very big blast radius with the airstrikes. Also, it's important to get the direction correct. So for example, if I would have done this airstrike on the screen now, the opposite direction, a lot of the rounds would have got caught up by the water tower obstruction, and I don't think I would have hit the radio at all, and I maybe would have disabled the hab, which would have been much less of an effective airstrike. This example looks kind of goofy because you couldn't see the explosions from the UAV perspective. For whatever reason, there was a short while where there was a bug on Scorpo specifically, I think, somewhere around V2.6, 2.7 where you weren't seeing these. I think it's been fixed now, but you can see it was an effective hit because it deleted the hab and put the radio on bleed immediately and killed the guys in the immediate area. Alright, so here's some really shitty sketches of a couple examples to consider when setting the angle of your airstrike. So in this first example, this is a hab that's on the side of a hill. You would want your airstrike to be angled towards the hill as perpendicular to the hill as possible so the rounds are as effective as they can be. If you were to shoot it the other direction, towards going along with the slope of the hill, being more parallel to the hill, a lot of the rounds are just going to whiz right by the hab and they're not going to be as effective as they could be. This next example is pretty much just like the one I just showed in the gameplay on Scorpo next to the water tower. You just need to consider your angle and approach that the A10 or SU-25 is going to have when it's hitting a hab that's hugging some sort of structure. Because as I said earlier, walls, buildings, or water towers will interrupt the rounds and prevent them from hitting the hab. So next I want to talk about using airstrikes to kill armor. There are situations where I will use an airstrike to kill a tank. It's a little bit rare because usually the timing of a tank spawn and my airstrike availability don't align. But when it does, as in this case on the screen now, because these tanks spawn right away, we were able to track two tanks side by side, making this a very juicy target. In this situation, I didn't have another hab to hit anyway. We were kind of rolling through the map pretty quickly, so this just made perfect sense to hit these tanks. I will say that I pretty much always want them not only to be tracked, but that there's somebody there watching them while they're tracked so they're not able to fix it and drive out of there. Because it takes time to get the airstrike going. It takes 30 seconds for the UAV to get there. It takes about a minute for the airstrike to actually hit. And there's some time in between while you're setting shit up. So there's several minutes of shit to do before that airstrike actually hits, which is plenty of time for a tank to fix its tracks and drive out of there. Alright, so now let's talk about artillery barrages. Let's discuss the differences between creeping versus static, how I use each one, and how I choose which one to use. So same as an airstrike, my first priority with artillery is to completely delete an enemy spawn point. That is, I want to find a hab that's very effective for the enemy in the open, and I'm probably going to use a static barrage right on top of it with a tight radius of 100 meters so that I know that it's 100% deleted. So probably the biggest mistake I see quite a lot with inexperienced commanders is when they call in an artillery barrage, they either use a static and extend the radius as wide as they possibly can, or they pick a creeping and they stretch it out as long as they possibly can, and they just think that it's going to kill everything in its path no matter what. That is not true. That's absolutely wrong. To delete a HAB, you probably need 10 to 15 155 artillery rounds to land right on it or within a few meters of it. So if you extend your radius to as wide as it can be, you're just taking the same amount of rounds and you're spreading them out over a bigger radius, spreading out the rounds further away from the HAB, the target you want to completely delete. Each artillery barrage includes 2 ranging rounds, which are going to center right wherever you call the tactical mark. And then there's 5 volleys, and each volley includes about 8 to 12 155 artillery rounds. So consider that when you're stretching this shit out, you're just taking those same rounds and you're spreading them out over a greater area. So this example playing on the screen right now is sort of an ideal situation. I found their nearest HAB to the attack point that I'm trying to attack. I find the HAB and the radio wide open right next to each other. So to me, that means I want to use a static barrage. I want to do a tight radius of 100 meters and I want to center it right on the target. And once I do that, I know for a fact it's absolutely going to delete both of them. I don't need to follow that up at all. I can tell my guys, in fact, that they can worry about something else. They might be focusing on killing another fob or building our fob or whatever. They won't need to worry about that fob anymore because it'll be fucking gone. There's no follow-up required. In this same example, the HAB is still at the stakes after the 4th volley, and it disappears just before the 5th volley because the radio bleeds out, but it would have needed that 5th volley to completely get rid of it. And that's with a static barrage centered right on top of it at a tight radius of 100 meters. Alright, so next let's talk about when I would choose a creeping barrage over a static barrage. A creeping barrage has a very specific purpose that I don't think a lot of people understand because I see people literally call them in backwards. A creeping barrage is specifically designed so you can follow the direction of the creep. That is, you have infantry pushing into a point. You set your creeping barrage in the direction leading away from your infantry so that they can follow right behind it. In this example, I have both my creeping and my static barrages available. The issue is that the HAB is inside a building that I know there's no way for me to hit it with my commander abilities whatsoever. Therefore, I'm choosing to use a creeping barrage, stretch it out pretty long because my guys are pushing out from several hundred meters away, and I want them to follow behind the creep. Each volley, I want them to advance 40, 50, 60 meters so that by the time it's finished hitting right on top of the enemy HAB, even though it's not going to disable it, it's going to soften up all the infantry along the way, and I want my infantry to be able to close the distance to the enemy HAB by the end of the creeping barrage. It's not as ideal as in the other example with the tight radius static barrage because obviously the enemy can still spawn in on their HAB, but at least it allows my infantry to push up and close the distance and assist them in killing the enemy fob and taking the cap. Okay, now let's look at an example of some of the mistakes I've been talking about. Here's an example on a refinery on Goose Bay where this commander is trying to kill this enemy fob. He wants to get rid of it. Instead of calling in a static barrage, which he had available with a tight radius, as in my other good examples, he calls in a creeping barrage, and then he calls it in backwards. He creeps it towards our friendlies, so they can't follow the creep at all. So instead of following it, they have to wait about 100 meters away from the end of the creeping barrage. The way this creeping barrage would look for each volley would be something like this. You would have volley 1 somewhere abouts in this blue box I'm drawing now, and then volley 2 would sort of overlap volley 1 and be continuing on down the line. And the issue with this is, as I'm highlighting now, you can see that only volleys 3 and 4 are actually overlapping the target he wants to hit. So he's just not going to have nearly enough 155 artillery rounds hitting on the target.
Enemy HAB is down.
They airstruck our backup. There's a Logi moving up there.
They're digging back up their HAB. 5 push on the HAB right now, they're trying to save it. Be advised, you got 2 inside the HAB. They're trying to dig it back up.
As you just heard, this was basically a failed artillery barrage because it was called in backwards, so the attacking squad had to wait for their artillery to completely finish before they could advance, and not nearly enough 155 artillery rounds hit the target, allowing the enemy to just dig it right back up. All right, the last subject I want to cover is avoiding TKs, specifically regarding artillery. It's very easy to get a bunch of TKs with artillery if it's not coordinated well. If you don't know, the game will auto kick you at 7 TKs no matter what. So if you have 7 TKs throughout the match, it will kick you for the remainder of the match. And you would need an admin with special privileges to undo that, which by the time that would happen, the match is pretty much over anyway. So obviously you want to avoid this. What I do within my own squad is I put my move mark at the nearest yellow edge of the artillery on the map, nearest my squad, and I tell them to stay 100 meters back from that. That's the most sure way to make sure I'm not going to TK my own guys. What I see a lot of other commanders do, another trick is to use your commander markings. The commanders have a few extra markings if you don't know, and I see people use the yellow triangle line mark thingy to delineate 100 meters away from the yellow markings on the map so the entire team can see where they need to set up and wait for the artillery to finish. While I try to keep track of the volleys during the artillery so that I can push in right after it's finished, if I lose count, one thing I can always fall back on is the artillery markings disappear just before the last volley. So as soon as you see that marking disappear, you can tell your guys one more volley, then you're pushing in. Hey, 100 meters, guys. 100 meters. 100 meters. Hold back 100 meters. Make sure you're holding back 100 meters so I don't TK you. Then the last thing I would say on this is that even though in 90-95% of the cases, once artillery is available, I would use artillery over an airstrike, there are some situations where my team has just pushed up too close to an enemy fob but is still struggling to kill it, that I cannot use artillery because we're too close to it, so I'll just use an airstrike so I don't TK my own guys. Alright, that's all I got. Hopefully this was a helpful guide, and thanks for watching, guys. Catch you later. So even if I get this hat, we got a lot of killing.
Mission successful.
I'm aware of my greatness, guys.